In 1906, Carl Laemmle, a 39-year-old German immigrant, quit his job as manager of the Continental Clothing Company in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He had spent the last 20 years building up a savings of $3,300, almost $100,000 in today's money, with hopes of opening up a retail store of his own in Chicago, Illinois. After a long day of looking at possible locations, Laemmle and his brother decided to take a break and check out the local Nickel Theater, an entertainment establishment that, at the time, was commonly referred to as a Nickelodeon. Laemmle had never seen a motion picture before. That evening, he tossed out his plans for a store and invested that money in opening his own theater, the White Front. One theater became a chain of theaters, Laemmle coming onto the scene just as the motion picture industry was becoming wildly profitable. However, Laemmle was dissatisfied with the process of film distribution. Film exchanges, the middlemen between film manufacturers and movie theaters, often had a low standard of quality, delivering films late and damaged. So Laemmle started his own film exchange, and by 1908, he was running the largest film distributor of that time, with offices stretching from Indianapolis to Portland. Among his business practices, Laemmle was credited for being the first to use the star system in motion pictures, the act of advertising and entertainment based on their actors. Once, Laemmle even got a hoax published in the newspapers that actress Florence Lawrence had been hit by a motor car and had died, to drum up interest in one of her movies. This kind of marquee appeal gave actors much more leverage in the film industry, much to the chagrin of Thomas Edison, whom Laemmle pretty much went to war against, taking Edison's companies to court to try and break their various monopolies. First movie theaters, then movie distribution, it was only natural that Laemmle would step into movie production as well, founding the Independent Moving Picture Company, or IMP, in 1909, first located in New York City, then moving to Los Angeles in 1910. The same year, the city consolidated the nearby municipality of Hollywood. In 1912, IMP consolidated with several other small film companies, forming Universal Film Manufacturing Company, or Universal Studios, the first major Hollywood film studio, beating out Paramount Pictures by exactly 8 days. Carl Laemmle served as president. But it wasn't just going to be a studio, oh no. Laemmle wanted to make his film company a destination, buying 230 acres of farmland in the San Fernando Valley and building his own movie-making city. Universal City wasn't just studio space, it was homes for the cast and crew, functioning ranches, factories and libraries and hotels. It had its own mayor, police and fire services, a post office, and a fairly substantial zoo. It wasn't just a company town, but a tourism town. The city opened on March 15, 1915, with a massive event that drew in 10,000 people, lured by the promise of seeing how movies are made. You'll see all your favorite screen stars at work. You'll see buildings built in an hour and then blown up. You'll see comedies and tragedies, ballroom and battle scenes. The 2-day event included a staged flood, a rodeo, a barbecue, and a grand ball, as well as an aerial show that sadly ended in tragedy when aviator Frank Stites crashed his biplane and was killed. Despite this, the event was otherwise seen as a huge success. Carl Laemmle can be credited for many things. He did a lot to create the classic Hollywood studio system, the culture of movie stars, and the business practices that would elevate motion pictures from technological curiosities to the dominant form of entertainment for decades to come. And under his presidency, Universal Studios would make definitive cinematic classics, such as All Quiet on the Western Front, the Universal monster movies, and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, one of Walt Disney's first creations. But Laemmle also realized that making movies could be, in their own way, a form of entertainment. The Universal Studios backlot saw regular tours. For just a nickel, you could watch the movies get made and have a chicken lunch. The backlot tour would go on for 15 years, but the advent of sound technology made the presence of the general public unworkable, and the tour ended in 1930. But the spirit of this idea lingered on, and Universal Studios would develop this idea over the decades, eventually creating 2 entire theme parks built around how they make movies. And then, 75 years after Universal's grand opening, an up-and-coming children's cable channel decided to team up with the studio and open production of their own shows to the public. This is the intersection of childlike wonder and corporate reality. The place where the little people on your screens become real, and television becomes a tourist trap. The dream vacation of millions of children still yearn for decades later, and a terrible, terrible idea. This is the story of Nickelodeon Studios. Like many motion picture studios, Universal Pictures, then under the name Universal International, was struggling going into the 1960s. Box office numbers were down, and television was taking over. In 1962, the studio was bought by the Music Corporation of America, or MCA, the world's largest talent agency at that time, and the accountants quickly went to work in finding ways to make the studio profitable again. Obviously, pivoting to television was a must. MCA had already found a lot of success in the medium under the subsidiary Revue Studios, who were responsible for early TV hits like Leave It to Beaver, Wagon Train, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and McHale's Navy. And Universal Television would continue the trend with shows like The Munsters, the 60s incarnation of Dragnet, and Adam 12. As a film studio, Universal had some major films early in the decade like The Birds and To Kill a Mockingbird, but the bulk of their 60s output were cheap B-movies, many of which would eventually wind up on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Films like Kitten with a Whip and Agent for Harm.
It's Universal, so it covers everything. Everything.
In many ways, Universal Pictures had become a home of cheap entertainment. But with that reputation came a certain public accessibility that other major studios lacked as long as they held on to that golden age of Hollywood sensibility. The studio had become a regular destination for tourists, with Gray Line tour bus coming in and out on a daily basis. However, these buses were large and cumbersome and occasionally would slow down production. Universal wanted to rework the tour idea into something more streamlined, more appealing, and more directly profitable. And so, in 1964, Universal revived the studio tour that Carl Laemmle had started nearly 50 years earlier. The studio hired Harper Goff, an artist and performer who had worked as an art director on the Disney film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and developed early concept art for Mickey Mouse Park, which would eventually become Disneyland, making him one of the first Imagineers. Goff would design the Glamour Trams, a 70-passenger candy-striped tram system that led tourists through various backlots, including the Bates Mansion from Psycho, and it would do it much more quickly and much more smoothly than a clumsy bus. After a test run in the summer of 1964, the tour expanded with additional attractions, including a rocking motor car and stagecoach, demonstrating the process of rear projection, a Wild West stunt show, film makeup demonstrations, a petting zoo for little children, and walk-around characters for the Universal movie monsters. Occasionally, guests would be allowed to watch the day's rushes of whatever movie or television show the studio had been working on that day. To tie the tour in with the studio's past, the tour even accepted lifetime passes that had been given out during Laemmle's original tour 40 years prior. The one thing guests could not do was witness actual film production, as that would be too disruptive. Over time, additional attractions were added to the tram tour, making it not merely a ride through backlot sets, but periodically winding through exciting special effects demonstrations. In 1968, the flash flood scene was added, with swift waters wiping out a Mexican village. Additions over the years included submarines shooting a torpedo at the tram in 1971, the parting of the Red Sea in 1973, a rock slide and collapsing bridge in 1974, and nearly getting hit by a runaway train in 1975. By 1971, the Universal Studios Tram Tour was the second largest tourist attraction in California, getting over 1 million visitors a year, with only Disneyland beating it out. Not bad for what was effectively a semi-theme park with only one 40-minute ride. The first tour event that was tied directly to a feature film came in 1975 with The Ice Tunnel, a scene inspired by the Clint Eastwood film The Eiger Sanction, a movie most of you didn't even know existed. Much more exciting was the Jaws event, added to the tour in 1976, which saw a 25-foot animatronic shark jump out and attack the tram. This became the defining image of the Universal Studios tour for a while, plastered all over their promotional material.
Good evening. Welcome to Universal Studios, where you learn Hollywood secrets. And now you'll learn the secrets of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman on the Universal Studios tour.
This was followed by a Battlestar Galactica experience in 1979. That year, the tour and other orbiting attractions, including an amphitheater for concerts, generated over $45 million in revenue for MCA. As these experiences developed, it became more and more tempting to expand the tour idea into a full-blown theme park to rival Disneyland, and especially Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. MCA had considered building an attraction in Florida all the way back in the early 70s, but a recession in 1974 dampened attempts at purchasing Florida property. This did not stop MCA from trying to break into the theme park business, with the company making an unsuccessful bid to take over SeaWorld in 1976 and the purchase of a 5.3% position in Cedar Point in 1978. In 1980, MCA announced a renewed interest in a Florida location, optioning 300 acres a mere 7 miles away from Walt Disney World. The arrangement in Florida will be radically different from California. For one thing, there won't be hills, but we're also designing this facility to do in such a way that it makes for a more entertaining experience for the visitor. The one thing a Florida location would not have, however, was proximity to working studios. Part of the charm of the classic Universal Studios tram tour was the idea that you could be within half a mile of Barbra Streisand making a movie. Would tourists be turned off by the lack of Hollywood? And how did Disney feel about a competitor moving in next door? Let's face it, they're feeding off of us. However, Universal's confidence in the project waned quite quickly. They figured they couldn't manage the production costs on their own, so in 1982, MCA allegedly approached Paramount Pictures about a potential partnership. The people at Paramount, which included their chief operating officer, Michael Eisner, declined the offer. In 1986, the Universal Studios tour added their biggest addition yet, the King Kong Encounter, featuring a 30-foot-tall, 7-ton animatronic, the biggest animatronic ever created up to that point, designed by Bob Gurr, the Disney Imagineer who helped create attractions like the Haunted Mansion and the Matterhorn. Reportedly, director Steven Spielberg was invited for an early test run by Peter Alexander, executive of Universal Creative, former Disney Imagineer, and Spielberg's former roommate. The story goes that Spielberg was impressed with the attraction, then brought up a conversation that he had with his pal George Lucas, who had been working on the Star Tours attraction at Disneyland. Lucas supposedly told Spielberg that no way could Universal make an attraction like Star Tours, and upon hearing this, Peter Alexander's eyes went red. He charged into Universal offices and declared that the Florida project was back on and it would have a sweet Star Tours-esque Back to the Future ride. It almost certainly didn't happen this way. If anything, Universal wasn't upset at Star Tours, but Michael Eisner, now the CEO of Disney, who a year prior in 1985 announced a partnership with MGM Studios to create a Hollywood studio-themed park at the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. Imagine, declining Universal's offer for a studio-themed park in Florida, then a few years later announcing you're doing it yourself with one of Universal's competitors. Who's feeding on who now, Ron? The King Kong experience proved popular. Universal Pictures was having a great decade in the movie theaters, and in December of 1986, MCA re-announced their intents at building a theme park in Orlando. They would soon find the business partner they'd always been looking for in the Cineplex Odeon Corporation, one of the biggest North American movie theater operators at that time, though they would soon back out and their stake in the project would be bought by the Rank Organization, a British leisure and entertainment conglomerate, in 1989. Construction on Universal Studios Florida began in October of 1987. While there would be a similar tram tour comparable to the one in Hollywood, the main draw would be standalone rides, taking the larger events of the tour, like Jaws, King Kong, and later Earthquake, and turning them into their own experiences separate from the trams. But there would be studio space. Not a lot of it, and it would ultimately be used for minor pictures like Psycho 4, but that would still make it the most active film operation in Florida. Of course, like with the Hollywood location, having tourists around these sets would be more trouble than it's worth. But what if Universal Studios Florida could have a space with active productions that tourists could interact with? It wouldn't work for film, but maybe for television? Television that attracted kids? Television that the whole family could enjoy? Perhaps a cable channel for children.
Now, the people who brought you the greatest movies of all time have brought those movies to life. Now you can live them. You face the frenzied attack of Jaws, the colossal fury of King Kong. You feel the mind-boggling power of an 8.3 earthquake, the spirit soaring flight across the sky with E.T. You join the Ghostbusters and much, much more. Now you play a part in all the glamour, spectacle, and adventure of a real working motion picture and television studio. This is no theme park. It's Universal Studios Florida. It's open now in Orlando, and it's the only place on Earth where you can see the stars and ride the movies.
Studio space had always been an issue for Nickelodeon, as the channel grew out of its Columbus, Ohio roots. For the first decade of its existence, most original Nick programming was scattered to the winds to whatever studio spaces were cheap and convenient. Pinwheel was shot in the short-lived Matrix Studios in New York City, nestled right next door to an auto shop. You Can't Do That on Television was shot in Ottawa at CJOH-TV. Against the Odds was shot in Los Angeles, Mr. Wizard's World was shot in Calgary, and Out of Control was shot in the Valley Production Center in Bath, Pennsylvania. Nickelodeon's operations were decentralized, which, among other factors, discouraged original productions. We basically migrated production from one city to another. We never got any momentum from successful productions because everything was so disparate. The nearest thing Nick had to a main studio prior to Florida was that belonging to PBS affiliate WHYY-TV in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was there that Nick first produced Double Dare, the children's game show that became the channel's breakout hit and the biggest cable television show up to that point. Nick continued to use the space for their game shows, such as Finders Keepers and Think Fast, but they were really just borrowing the space. Now, by the late 1980s, Nickelodeon had found some success and some capital, so maybe buying, or at least long-term leasing, a small dedicated studio wouldn't be the biggest issue. But if you're going to take a swing, you might as well swing for the fences. Some news sources claim that both Disney and Universal were both courting Nickelodeon for various projects, but in actuality, it was Nick who pitched the idea to MCA, whom they already developed a relationship with, as the first 4 Kids' Choice Awards would be staged at Universal Studios Hollywood. In the fall of 1988, With Universal Studios Florida still in the early days of its construction, Nickelodeon and MCA started to work out a deal. This would have been very appealing for MCA, as it took down two birds with one stone. While the Florida park would have studio space, there was no guarantee how active those studio spaces would be, as Universal's major projects would still be based out of Hollywood. Having Nickelodeon on the park would mean that at least some of the studios would be active pretty much throughout the year. It also gave the park more name brands to work with. As Disney MGM demonstrated, anyone could do a movie studio themed park. Universal Pictures and MCA may have been the first to do it, but they didn't have the exclusive rights to that concept. It was too broad of an idea to copyright, the same way you can't copyright the idea of a roller coaster or a merry-go-round. Instead, Universal Studios Florida hinged on intellectual properties and name brands. Jaws, King Kong, E.T., Back to the Future. That's what you were going to the park to see, because those are the kind of things you wouldn't find at a Disney park. And Nickelodeon, the first and at the time only cable channel for children, would not only add to the exclusive intellectual properties at Universal Studios Florida, it would be an attraction that would draw younger audiences. Not every 5-year-old has the nerves to ride the Jaws attraction, or the interest to see the Murder, She Wrote live show, and Universal Studios Florida ran the risk of having a bunch of toddlers whining throughout the park about how they wanted to go to Walt Disney World and see Mickey Mouse instead. Nickelodeon, having its own corner in the park, gave these younger kids a place to go, something to be drawn to. A true meeting of the minds took place when the negotiating team from Universal sat down with Nickelodeon and presented its global objective: to show visitors television production on a near continuous basis, no matter what day of the week or week of the year. Nickelodeon gave us what no one else could, as well as the added interactive benefits of drawing on-air contestants and studio audiences from the tour groups passing through. So in November of 1988, Nickelodeon signed a 13-year agreement with MCA, taking over a 90,000 square foot production center, consisting of two of the park's 16,500 square foot sound stages, Stage 18 and 19, plus administrative offices and a rehearsal stage, where they would produce television shows 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year, except Christmas. Nickelodeon would run the studio, and Universal would run the tour through the studio. The idea was announced publicly in February of 1989.
Nickelodeon Studios, Florida. Most of it's a secret, but we can tell you this. Start practicing, because when you get here, you could be picked to plan any of the messed up shows being made at Nickelodeon Studios. So get a map, memorize the route from your house to Universal Studios in Orlando. Make sure you destroy the evidence. Then, get a really good umbrella. We can't tell you why. Just trust us.
Nickelodeon Studios at Universal Studios, Florida. It's the place you've been waiting for.
Construction began shortly thereafter. The exterior would be designed by Nickelodeon production designer Byron Taylor, who had been the art director for Finders Keepers and Super Sloppy Double Dare. Taylor would give the front of the building a collage of colors and patterns inspired by the Memphis style of design. Interior design was handled by Don St. Mars, who had been an art director for the Kearns and Associate Advertising Agency through the 80s. He was responsible for many of the interior murals. Careful attention was made to sightlines, making sure that shorter children had proper visibility as they toured through the glass catwalks that overlooked the sound stages. Adults working on the studio were encouraged to sit on their knees at every possible vantage point to make sure things looked good for young guests. However, not everything went smoothly. What the studio was being made for and what it ultimately would be used for changed in all stages of construction and use. There were so many tweaks made to Nick Studios' original configuration that you could write a book about it. Each stage was supposed to hold 2 shows the size of the original Double Dare, which had started out in a 50 by 90 studio in Philly. This was a huge error, since the most recent version of Double Dare was considerably bigger. A state-of-the-art automated lighting system was installed oriented for the 2-set configuration as well. This posed a problem for the rigging of all future sets. Nickelodeon would have less control of the actual building construction than they would have liked. The final blueprints were approved by Universal, and many of Nickelodeon's more playful ideas were completely rejected. One pitch would have seen a large model of an animated T-Rex used in some of Nick's promotional material breaking through a bathroom wall. But such shenanigans were quickly shut down, and this was hardly the only wild idea. There was an idea that there would be air jets shooting out of the floor and somebody's dress might fly up. It would be subversive and unexpected. There were going to be garbage cans that talked to you. You could paint the walls with fun colors and patterns, but MCA wanted a properly working studio, scaled to the original version of Double Dare. But Nickelodeon wasn't just going to make the tiny game shows like they had in Philly. Nickelodeon wasn't paying rent anymore. They were saving a lot of money doing this, and that encouraged additional, more ambitious productions. Being here at Universal has allowed us to do a much higher level of production, like comedies or music shows. This was stuff we couldn't afford to do in New York or Los Angeles because we couldn't afford the sound stages. But why were the studios so cheap? Why did MCA let Nickelodeon have them for a song? Something that cannot be overstated in all of this is that one of the motivating factors in Nickelodeon Studios' creation was the opportunity for cross-marketing. Universal is marketing-oriented and understood exactly what Nickelodeon was bringing to the table. They were impressed by our volume of production, our on-air attitude, and the way we operate as a cable network, and the popularity we enjoy among kids. It's a win-win deal for everybody. We were good for them, and they were good for us. One of the stipulations MCA laid out for this partnership was that the Nickelodeon channel would promote Universal Studios Florida at least 1,000 times a year. This meant advertising during the commercial breaks, of course, but also trips to Universal Studios Florida started popping up as the grand prizes of most of the channel's game shows, even the ones that were already being filmed at Universal Studios Florida, and of course every show produced on site in the park would have this classic end card.
Make the Grade was produced before a live audience in Nickelodeon Studios at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida.
Nick Arcade is taped before a live studio audience at Nickelodeon Studios at Universal Studios, Orlando, Florida.
Legends of the Hidden Temple was recorded in front of a live studio audience in Nickelodeon Studios at Universal Studios, Florida.
Nickelodeon, on the other hand, used Nickelodeon Studios as part of a complex web of self-promotion. They dubbed this advertising initiative Matrix Marketing, in which different products would promote each other, creating a web of consumer influence. In the November 20th, 1989 issue of Broadcasting Magazine, Rich Cronin, Nickelodeon's senior vice president of marketing at the time, identified 9 categories that made up the Matrix Marketing program. First, obviously, was the Nickelodeon cable channel itself, which had already developed a core audience and could use its own advertising space to promote its own products. Second was the Nickelodeon road shows, where Nickelodeon personalities would tour malls across America, often performing versions of their various shows. This practice began in 1984 with Pinwheel, but was much more common for game shows like Double Dare. Third was the Nickelodeon Club, a joint project between Nickelodeon and BMG Directing Marketing Incorporation, an operating unit of Bertelsmann Music Group. With a membership fee of $9.95, members of the Nickelodeon Club would receive an orange membership card, which would get them discounts at Pizza Hut and TCBY Yogurt. Let kids pretend they have their own credit card. They would also receive a Knick-Knack gift pack containing coupons, product samples, a newsletter, program information, and other premium items. These gift packs, category number 4, were sent to club members, but reportedly there was also intent to also send them to the 1.2 million children that Nickelodeon already had in their database after years of surveys and focus group testing, which, if I may editorialize, is a little scummy. Thanks for helping us develop our brand and integrity, kids. Here's a box full of advertising.
Coming up on Nickelodeon Studios Update after this message from Pizza Hut.
The fifth of our Matrix marketing categories was Nickelodeon Magazine. This initial stab at publishing only ran for 2 issues and was primarily distributed through participating Pizza Huts, offering news and promotions for Nickelodeon projects, including the still in construction Nickelodeon Studios. It wouldn't be until 1993 that Nickelodeon got a regular monthly periodical off the ground. The 6th and 7th categories were just licensing and promotions. Pretty self-explanatory. The 8th category, a lifestyle catalog, offering fashion, electronic, and toy products. And finally, our 9th category, the soon-to-be-open Nickelodeon Studios. Watch Nickelodeon, see an ad for the Roadshow, go to the Roadshow, sign up for the Nickelodeon Club, use the club card at Pizza Hut, get a copy of Nickelodeon Magazine at Pizza Hut, join the Nickelodeon Club through the magazine, get the Knick-Knack gift pack through the club, tell your friends, wear the t-shirts you got from the catalog, come to Nickelodeon Studios, get the shirt you saw in the catalog, hey, they're giving away the gift packs at Nickelodeon Studios, when's Nickelodeon Studios opening anyway? I better watch Nickelodeon and get the Nickelodeon Magazine to find out. Matrix Marketing! And since we're on the capitalism side of things, it's worth pointing out that, unlike California or New York, Florida was and still is a right-to-work state, meaning not a single Nickelodeon Studios production was required to hire through labor unions. For Nickelodeon, that was a good deal, and one that, might say, incentivized bringing productions outside of Florida into the state, no matter how much of a move that is for everyone. This would ultimately doom the studio, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. While the park was not yet open, enough of construction had been completed that Nickelodeon began to film Super Sloppy Double Dare in the new studio space beginning on April 17, 1989, with contestants and audience members pulled from local Florida schools. The second season of Think Fast began filming at the studio in January 12, 1990. On January 31, 1990, a news conference was held outside of the studio, including Nickelodeon President Jerry Laybourne, Senior Vice President of Production Jeffrey Darby, and Batley from Eureka's Castle. It was here that Laybourne would declare, "The next decade will be the Nickelodeon 90s." And you know what? It really would be.
You can go to Nickelodeon Studios.
Why just sit there when you can go to Nickelodeon Studios? Button sits are getting packed. Mom is making up a great big snack singing Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon. How do we get there? I don't know. It's right on the map. Come on, let's go. Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, Florida. You can go there.
Universal is counting on the popularity of its Tinseltown theme. It should probably be called Hollywood South. Scores of celebrities joined director Steven Spielberg for the official opening of Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida.
Congratulations, everybody, and we're really happy to be here in Florida, and we'll be here forever. Thank you.
Stargazers were loving it all, but those who came to ride the movies found most rides closed. Jaws wasn't biting any tourists, and Kong's public was just getting a lot of sun. Earthquake was silent.
I flew in from New York about a week ago, and I look forward to it, but it's a big disappointment.
I don't think they were quite ready. I think they need a little more run-through.
Universal says that rides had to be taken offline today for fine-tuning, mostly of their computer software. They say that after that, Kong, Jaws, and earthquakes will wreak havoc on Central Florida.
Disgruntled visitors who, for the third day since the grand opening, find the new amusement park plagued with problems. Technicians say the heavily publicized King Kong ride may not be working until Monday. Also, often inoperable are the earthquake ride and the Jaws Lagoon. For the last 2 days, officials at the park offered complimentary tickets for future visits.
The studio opened, and there was a huge celebration in Orlando. None of the rides worked. It was 110 degrees. People were walking around with silver trays and black velvet and with champagne. Everybody standing in line for rides that were half open. But it was a wonderful time. Very glitzy glamour. After a number of delays, Universal Studios Florida opened its gates on June 7th, 1990. It didn't go great. Power outages resulted in long delays in many of the attractions, including Jaws, Confrontation, and Earthquake. The intended Back to the Future ride was not yet finished. The attractions that did work, such as the E.T. Adventure and the Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera, had to take on the brunt of the crowds. Refunds were given out, and it was frankly a pretty poor first showing. Though you wouldn't know it if you were watching Nickelodeon that day.
Live from Orlando, Florida, it's the amazing 3-hour Nickelodeon Studios opening day celebration. Here is Mark Summers.
Welcome to the Nick Studios, ladies and gentlemen. We are live. First time in 11 years we're doing a live broadcast on Nickelodeon, and it means we are coming to you from our new home right here in Orlando, Florida. These are your studios where you can come to watch Nick being made, and you can audition to be on a Nick show. In this show, you're going to see exactly what your new headquarters are like, and all the stuff you can do when you're down here, and believe me, it's great stuff.
Hosting duties bounced around from Double Dare's Mark Summers, Total Panic's Greg Lee, Think Fast Skip Lackey, and Hey Dude's Kelly Brown and Christine Taylor in character as Brad and Melody. Meanwhile, the kids from Don't Just Sit There went around promoting all the various attractions in the park, including the Battle of the Ages, King Kong vs. Will Friedle.
Lighten up, Kong. This isn't the jungle, you know. Maybe close, but it's not. Take these, not me.
Also showing up was Ross from You Can't Do That on Television, musical performances by The Perfect Gentleman, The Cover Girls, and Kid and Play. And oh look, Steven Spielberg is here. Hey Steven, why are you wearing that raincoat?
I don't know. You know, it's
Just a quick question. Exactly how did that feel?
like my son threw up on me.
There's also this weird subplot about 3 old people plotting to destroy Nickelodeon, but it's so separate from the rest of the show that everyone just kind of ignores them until the end.
Wait, do you smell something?
You.
Smells like it's coming from here. Ooh, when was the last time you brushed your teeth?
Why, this morning. Never you mind my teeth. We're talking about your vile studios.
Hey, what's the volume on this thing?
Don't you touch that knob. No, youngster. No, sir. Don't you touch that.
Holy cow, what was it with that guy? I can't believe him,
I don't know. Anyway, before we were so rudely interrupted...
Alberta Griffith and 6 other children won the Nickelodeon Express Hometown Sweepstakes, a contest promoting the Amtrak Railroad Company. The kids got to ride from North Carolina to Orlando in a converted passenger car with Mark Summers, Will Wheaton, and the hottest new video games. And Alberta became the guest of honor for the grand opening special. The special concluded with the Don't Just Sit There kids rerouting slime meant for the green slime geyser out front and spraying the old people instead.
Keep turning, don't stop.
I hate slime. There's nothing more I hate than slime.
Oh, you hate ice cream more than... Oh.
Well, don't think this is the end, you pointy-headed Nickelodeon lettuce avoiders. Have your fun. We'll be back. And when you least expect it...
Which makes me wonder if this subplot was added to justify the fact that Slime Geyser was not yet operational, and would have its own live television debut on October 27th, 1990.
This is Danny Gara, live at Nickelodeon Studios, where the pressure of the Earth's green slime is threatening to explode the planet. In a few seconds, Nickelodeon's president, Gerald Laybourne, will throw a switch, and kablooey! The green slime geyser will erupt for the very first time. Let's see if the green slime geyser can save the planet from its slime crisis.
You hurt?
I'm awfully glad to help, Greg.
Listen, we really need your help here, Jerry, so let's do something fast.
Come on.
Okay.
Hurry.
Here we go. Stand back. Be careful now. Stay clear there, folks. Stay clear. You better get back. Stay clear. Everybody be careful. Keep it clear back there. Everybody okay here? Yeah! Be careful back there. Oh!
In its initial months, Nickelodeon Studios filmed Super Sloppy Double Dare, Family Double Dare, Make the Grade, Eureka's Castle, and Total Panic, the latter of which we replaced by the Universal Studios promoting Outta Here. Now, each of the shows filmed at Nickelodeon Studios have already gotten or will get a full-length episode of Knacks eventually, so we won't be covering each and every one in detail. Not that these shows were being recorded every day. Because truthfully, a studio filming 364 days a year isn't really reasonable. Most game shows film 3 to 5 episodes in a single day. It took about 4 days to film an episode of Clarissa Explains It All, but those were only 13-episode seasons. There were just going to be periods of time where there was nothing to film, so you kinda had to fake it. We contractually had to have something going on the stages every day when the park and tour were open. Sometimes there were legitimate productions going on. But when there wasn't, there was the necessity of creating the illusion there was. They called it camera blocking. They had all kinds of names for it. They had PAs down there moving things around, looking busy. The need for constant production also resulted in as many as 25 television pilots being filmed at the studio by 1992, though sadly most of them aren't publicly documented. This was how we got the Kids Court reboot pilot starring Greg Lee. Tickets to be guests on Nickelodeon's game shows were purchased from a guest relations office just inside the front gate. Kids could also sign up to audition to be contestants. From the gate, it was only a short walk up the Plaza of the Stars, past the Rodeo Drive intersection, and there you are, Production Central, the park's collection of sound stages. To their right would be Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, a film/live show that let park guests reenact scenes from Saboteur, Strangers on a Train, and Rear Window. Guests could instead take a left on Nickelodeon Way, and either walk past or ride The Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera, a simulator ride starring classic Hanna-Barbera characters like Yogi Bear, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and Scooby-Doo. This also came with an interactive zone where kids could play with sound effect machines and digital coloring books and meet Hanna-Barbera walk-around characters. In front of Nickelodeon Studios sat the Green Slime Geyser, which went off approximately every 10 minutes. It was designed by theater and exhibitor designer Tom Hennis. The Slime Geyser also served as the starting and end point of Universal Studios' production tram tour, a 20-minute echo of the original Universal Studios Hollywood tram. The tour took guests past the working studios as well as the Boneyard, a collection of larger props and pieces of sets from movies like Jaws and Ghostbusters. Nickelodeon Studios provide other photo opportunities around the Slime Geyser, including a Double Dare stand, a Eureka's Castle stand, and a Nickelodeon bench. From here you can get in line for the studio tour, grouping up with a tour guide and taking an escalator up past the audition room for potential game show contestants. This would lead you up to the windowed walkways over active studio space.
As you can see over here to the far left, there are a lot of props, a lot of games. It looks like almost like a, well, actually it looks like my room looks right now. I'm in the middle of moving. But you won't see that on television. What you'll see on television is exactly what the camera wants you to see.
From here, the tour went past the production control room, and to show off the studio's soundproofing, children were encouraged to scream "Nickelodeon" at the top of their lungs to get the director's attention.
Now, any parents who want to purchase some of this plate glass, see me afterwards.
Then you went past the costuming department and the kitchens, presented by Pizza Hut, of course, where you just might get a taste of some fresh slime from the studio's Gackmeister. Finally, the tour swung past the makeup department, where, if you were lucky, you could see Mark Summers getting ready for the day's shoot. At the end of the tour, guests were encouraged to interact with the talkback kiosks, touchscreen computers that asked for demographic information and ratings on the attractions, because Nickelodeon is never not data collecting. It was from here that one could access the audition space seen at the beginning on the escalators. Here, kids would play simple games of Simon Says to see if they were contestant material.
Now kids, have you ever watched one of your favorite Nickelodeon game shows and thought to yourself, I cannot believe the bozos they've got on television. I should be on TV. I should be winning those prizes, winning that cash, right? I'm a lot smarter. I'm a lot better looking. They should put me on television, right? That's right. We've all said it or thought it at one time or another, but let me assure you guys, it's not as easy as you think it is. It requires that you pay really close attention to everything being said and everything that's going on around you.
You could also go to the bathroom, where you would find green slime hand soap, toilets that made noises like gongs or explosions when flushed, and for a brief period, Nickelodeon branded toilet paper, though that idea was dropped pretty quickly as guests kept stealing rolls. On average, the tour took about 40 minutes. Not a thrill ride, not a flashy studio show, but a simple walkthrough, showing how Nickelodeon shows were made. In many ways, this made Nickelodeon Studios the Universal Studios Florida attraction that was closest to the intent of the original Hollywood tour. It also made Nickelodeon a tangible, touchable thing that children could potentially interact with. The real role Nickelodeon plays is letting kids visit their own attraction. It's programming for kids, by kids.
Nickelodeon is the world's leading television network for children. 2 sound stages are the site of live-action programming. While sharing in the excitement of taking part in programming designed just for them, children have a close-up look at how television is produced.
Folks, as you move down here, everybody gather around the GAC kitchen. Let me hear you say, tastes good. Can you say that? No. No, come on. Okay, green slime, Jonathan says. Oh, Jonathan. Silly, you're supposed to say it tastes good. Don't you know the rule that if you don't like it, you wear it? Did you know that? No, okay. Let's see some of the stuff we've got up here. Tracy, I think this would probably look good on you. Yeah, let's see, turn around. That's good. And you, this would look good on you. What do you think? Whose kid is this? Is he dressed like this at home?
Put your hands down. Simon says sit on the orange line and take a break. You guys did a good job.
In January of 1991, former Viacom Executive Vice President Scott Davis was handpicked by Jerry Laybourne to be the general manager of Nickelodeon Studios. A self-described workaholic, Davis insisted on constantly fine-tuning and revising the studio attraction. We are finding we have to constantly review the presentation of our tour. We're concerned with how people move through the tour and how audiences work as it relates to the flow and what is going on at the park. 1991 would be an enormous year for Nickelodeon, with the premiere of many iconic shows, including the original Nicktoons trilogy of Doug, Rugrats, and The Ren and Stimpy Show. Original animation would be a defining force for the channel going into the 1990s, which meant that Nickelodeon Studios was kind of on the back foot very early on, since it had nothing to do with animation production. But it still had its big shows. 1991 would be the year of Clarissa Explains It All, a multi-cam sitcom that introduced the world to Melissa Joan Hart. Game show Get the Picture, which brought Mike O'Malley to the channel, Hi Honey I'm Home, one of the few original Nick at Night programs, and What Would You Do?, a Mark Summers-led variety program that was made specifically for the Universal Studios Florida experience.
Yes, sir, if you keep your eyes open, there's no telling who you might spot. Look, it's Larry Bird. Check out Tom Selleck. Say, isn't that Reverend Jim Baker?
It was a very unique filming situation, and it didn't agree with everybody. There were very few spaces for cast and crew to have true privacy with the constant stream of park guests. Thousands of children a day pressing their noses against the glass as you're getting your makeup done.
You would see this Nickelodeon tour and you would all see these kids looking through a window, looking at us like a bunch of talented fish.
At first you were very aware of it, but after a while you just forgot. So we would be in the hair and makeup room or in the wardrobe room, and then all of a sudden you'd just turn around and there would just be a kid with his face pressed up against the glass, and so it created this, it was this zoo effect. And so you really felt like you were always on.
After a while, they wanted every part of our lives exposed, and I hated that. Especially when you're a performer, you need to be in makeup and hair. And I went to management and said, I'm begging you to close a curtain while we're getting made up and get that microphone out of there. Well, they said they wouldn't do it. Okay, fine. So I waited one night till everybody was gone, and I went in and pulled the guts out of all the microphones in there. And it took them a month. They couldn't figure out why the hell everything's plugged in, but I ripped all the innards out of the microphone so they couldn't hear what the hell we were saying because I didn't want to be bothered.
Sorry, no pictures, no pictures.
Nickelodeon Studios was a good idea for many reasons. It allowed for the production of many high-quality shows at reduced production costs. It was a central pillar of their cross-marketing efforts, and it did wonders for the Nickelodeon brand. But as an actual space to work, it wasn't always ideal. Most of the creatives and on-screen talent weren't Orlando natives and either had to move or, more likely, be constantly flying in and out of state. The sets had to be designed so that they weren't just presentable to the camera, but to those above in the glass walkways. The talent always had to be on. You couldn't visibly have a bad day because you're also a theme park attraction. Watch your language, don't show frustration, always be high energy and smiling. I've worked enough retail jobs with the same philosophy to know that this can suck.
Eric Kubiak, this morning just another kid in a theme park. Now, Nickelodeon Game Lab inventor.
Let's use the slingshots and the rubber chickens. Put a kid in a bowl with the giant fly swatter. Use the blindfolds. Now, let him rip.
At Nick's Game Lab, kids make the rules. Only at Nickelodeon Studios, the place where Nick is made.
This has been an update from Nickelodeon Studios at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida.
One major change to the attraction this year was the introduction of the Nickelodeon Studios Game Lab. Repurposing the original audition space, this mini-show, running for 15 minutes every half hour with a 250 guest capacity, presented itself as a space where Nickelodeon Studios could test out its various games and challenges used in its game shows. Adults would sit separately from the children, and guests would be selected to play various games, like trying to pack a suitcase the fastest, or catching catapulted rubber chickens in oversized pants. The main event would see a child chosen from the audience sitting in a kiddie pool having a bucket of slime dumped on their head. But things keep going wrong. First the slime is frozen, then it turns into powder after one of the staff tries to microwave it. But the third time's the charm.
We want our slime! I think we got it this time. It looks good. Oh, yeah. Thanks for coming to Game Lab. We'll see you guys at Nickelodeon. Bye-bye. Okay, everyone stay in your seat. Let's give our host, Pat Harlem, a big round of applause!
The look of Game Lab changed rapidly over the years. A large television was implemented, showing the staff members collecting the slime from the geyser outside. Signage from Nickelodeon shows past and present were added to the walls over time. The games themselves would implement themes of contemporary shows on the channel, often in a way to integrate Nicktoons into the park attraction, such as games where you dressed up as the Angry Beavers or Cat Dog. But it was always capped with a child in a kiddie pool getting slimed. Game Lab served a number of functions to the studio attraction. While Nickelodeon was fulfilling its contract of shooting something every single day of the year, it wasn't always shooting game shows. The fantasy of being on a Nickelodeon game show was one of the major appeals of the studio attraction, and show tickets at the gates sold out quickly, and many tickets were given out at random by staff members walking the park. Even the most dedicated of pre-internet theme park goers would have a hard time getting into Double Dare with any level of confidence. Game Lab meant that, no matter what, guests would get some kind of game show experience. The story that this is where Nickelodeon tested out all their games enforced the illusion that all children had a say as to what Nickelodeon was. Not to mention, it increased your chances of getting slimed by quite a bit.
Hey Nick, I'm Eileen from Chicago, Illinois, and I'd like to know how a show gets from here at Nickelodeon Studios to my house.
Good question, Eileen. After a show has been written, the set built, and the actors rehearsed, the show is performed in front of the cameras, which are really just like overgrown camcorders. The director then picks the shots he wants, the audio engineer makes sure you can hear it, the editor puts all the pieces together, then it's sent up to a satellite and beamed down to your TV.
Wow, that's cool. And when does Nickelodeon do all that?
Every day.
Wow.
Nickelodeon Studios, the place where Nick is made.
In December of 1991, Nickelodeon Studios introduced a Stimpy walk-around character to help promote Ren and Stimpy merchandise that was being sold at the nearby Nickelodeon Studios gift shop. This was seen as a success, so in early 1992, the studio started experimenting with costume meet-and-greet characters in the vein of meeting Mickey Mouse at Disneyland. Characters included Ren and Stimpy from The Ren and Stimpy Show, Doug and Porkchop from Doug, Batley, Magellan, and Eureka from Eureka's Castle, and in later years, Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life, and Chucky and Angelica from Rugrats. There was also a costume for the Doo-Wop-asaurus, the animated dinosaur used in several Nickelodeon promos.
Here's Doo-Wop-asaurus out at Universal Studios, Florida, looking for a nice family to join us right here at the Studio Stars Grill. They're going to be participating in our National Doo-Wop-asaurus Day and dine with a bunch of families who've agreed to help us with our test.
On April 30th, 1992, the Nickelodeon time capsule was buried in front of Nickelodeon Studios. The burial event was hosted by Mike O'Malley, featured Joey Lawrence from Blossom, and the Parks Walk-Around Doc Brown character. Over 30 items decided on by Nickelodeon viewers were included in the time capsule, with intent to be opened 50 years later in 2042.
On this spot, in 50 years, the kids of the future will be able to come here and visit the first world headquarters from kids and find out what is important to kids today. We hope by then that we have found solutions to our problems, that our dreams have become realities, and that the concerned kids of 1992 have become the concerned adults of the year 2042.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, Joey.
The time capsule will really become a part of our history, huh?
A big part of our history, Joey. That's right, and we're going to have a special plaque commemorating our time capsule for all visitors at Nickelodeon Studios here at Universal Studios in Florida. But our contents, the contents of this time capsule right here, will remain untouched until April 30th, 2042.
While a very silly presentation, the Nickelodeon time capsule was one of the first major ways in which Nickelodeon engaged with kids about the current state of the world and hopes for the future, something that would be reflected time and again throughout the next decade and change. Notable shows brought to the studio included Nick Arcade, which used cutting-edge chroma keying to put kids into video game scenarios, Nickelodeon Guts, co-created by Scott Fishman, which required the full studio space instead of the half studio space most game shows required, and Roundhouse, a musical sketch comedy show that would become one of the original SNCC shows. By 1992, Nickelodeon was the largest media producer in Florida, accounting for 20% of all program production in the Orlando area. Though you have to remember, that's just from a half dozen shows at any given time. Full-time employment at Nickelodeon Studios sat typically at 200 employees, and up to 450 during peak periods, making it one of the most consistent places to work in the state for grips, gaffs, and camera operators. We use a very, very high percentage of local labor and talent. When you look at our shows, they are usually built, dressed, and propped from scratch here, locally. This was great for the local economy. In terms of general production as a whole, the first 6 months of 1992 saw $31.6 million worth of motion pictures, television shows, and commercials filmed in the Orlando area. However, as Nickelodeon continued to grow bigger and bigger into the 1990s, this would prove a problem for the studio. But we'll get to that when we get to that. In the meantime, Orlando was celebrating the amount of business the park and Nickelodeon Studios was bringing in. As one of his final acts in office, Orlando Mayor Bill Federick declared June 29th as Nickelodeon Kids Day for the city, allowing the network to take over the town with 8 children appointed in key positions such as honorary mayor, fire chief, and police chief. And even the Orlando City Hall got slimed. 3 years in, and Nickelodeon Studios was riding quite the high. Enjoy it, because this is the point things start to really go downhill.
Kids rule at Universal Studios, Florida. You'll rocket back to the future. Fly home with E.T. Face King Kong. Blast off with Yogi. Join Rocky and Bullwinkle. Rock out with Beetlejuice. Explore Fivel's Giant Playland. Get slimed at Nickelodeon Studios. And watch us film hit TV shows like Clarissa Explains It All. So come ride the movies and much, much more at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida.
On April 16th through the 18th, 1993, Nickelodeon Studios hosted the Kids World Council, in which 56 children from around the world convened to gather ideas about preserving the planet and constructing an action plan that would be presented to Washington. A sort of test run of what would become Nickelodeon's annual The Big Help program that would begin in 1994. A special called Planet for the Planet was filmed, hosted by Linda Ellerby and featuring Vice President Al Gore in open conversation.
Well, I think that they don't care about it as much just because they're grown up and half of their future is probably about over. And
Wait a minute.
Our fortune's all been told.
Wait a minute.
Nickelodeon Studios continued to tweak the aesthetics of the attraction, introducing new wall decorations and photo areas, and adding video game kiosks to the line going into the studio, where park guests could sample Sega games, a promotional tie-in with Nick Arcade. Buses taking guests to the Universal Studios park were given a new Nickelodeon paint job. The shows were getting bigger. There was Wienerville, with its giant city set and large puppet stages. There was Legends of the Hidden Temple, with its iconic Temple Run set. Nickelodeon Guts was still in production. The need for increased production space necessitated Nickelodeon rent out a third studio from Universal. Some room did clear up, however, as Roundhouse was out. Oh, it hadn't been canceled, but had instead moved production of its second season to the CBS Studio Center in Los Angeles. It wasn't quite a divorce, but a trial separation. Yeah, Nickelodeon, maybe we should see other people. Nickelodeon, based in Orlando, and Rebel Entertainment were always at odds in terms of the content and the music of the show. So to have the show in LA, we had distance between us and Nick. It didn't help, in terms of survival, that Roundhouse was Nickelodeon's most expensive show to produce. Also, being in LA, we had a chance for people in the industry, i.e. agents, managers, other network execs, and press, to come and see a live taping of the show. In Orlando, you don't get that opportunity. Among the reasons suggested for this move was the grueling commute, as most of the cast and crew were not Florida natives and had to be constantly taking red-eye flights across the country, and there was a lack of union support. Guitarist and songwriter Marty Walsh, who composed and performed for the show, found conditions pretty unagreeable. As musicians on a TV show, we all thought this would be put through the musicians' union. It's not, as it's being shot in Florida, which is a huge deal. If a TV show goes into syndication, the participants continue to share in the revenue, so you can see the problem here. The upside was the band was writing 25 to 30 music cues every week, so the royalties on this through ASCAP or BMI would make up for the lack of revenue through the union contract. Problem solved? We would find out after the fact, but if we walked, it would have been disastrous. This was a sign of things to come. Yes, Nickelodeon was hiring a lot of craftsmen and technical workers here in Florida, but these shows still required Hollywood talent to be flown in, and most of that talent would recognize that Nickelodeon's operation was an inferior deal to those that they were getting from the Hollywood unions. Nickelodeon was willing to let Roundhouse go, to split off from Nickelodeon Studios. On one hand, it's good that they recognized that there was a better way to produce this show rather than enforce inferior conditions on the cast and crew. But on the other hand, we're starting to see the fracturing of Nickelodeon productions, spreading them out across the country, which was a problem Nickelodeon Studios was supposed to fix. If the problem's just going to re-emerge, if people are going to push back against working in Florida, well, what's the point of Nickelodeon Studios then?
We're standing in front of Nickelodeon Studios where we're awaiting the arrival of Rachel Bryn, winner of the Nickelodeon Studio Chief for a Day contest. Look, here she comes now! Rachel, welcome to Nickelodeon Studios. Come on out here. Boom. Now, what is your first wish as Nick Studio Chief?
I want to see Ren and Stimpy.
Yeah! All right.
And I want to see it right now.
Rachel, you got it.
On February 14th, 1994, Nickelodeon Studios filmed its 1000th episode of television, an episode of Wienerville. In 1989, before the Universal Studio space, Nickelodeon produced 103 episodes of original programming that year. Now they were averaging 285 a year. By 1994, they had spent $110 million on production since opening. Sitcom My Brother and Me and preschool puppet shows Allegra's Window and Gullah Gullah Island were added to the production line. And with the introduction of the Nick Jr. mascot, Face, in September, the character started showing up in the television displays during the tour, targeting more of the preschoolers among park guests.
Call your mother. Face here. Go on. You gotta sit down.
But this still wasn't enough production to maintain Nickelodeon's Film Something Every Day contract, so Nickelodeon Studios would spread out into other MTV network projects, namely a number of film concerts for VH1 with artists such as the Bee Gees, Travis Tritt, and Melissa Etheridge. Otherwise, this was a pretty straightforward year for the studio. Arguably the last straightforward year for the studio.
February 2nd, 1994, a historic day for Nickelodeon Studios, the place where Nick is made.
Nickelodeon Studios has completed its 1,000th episode. What did it take to do it? Over 40,000 pounds of foam padding, 65,000 buckets of slime, hundreds of technicians, and thousands of kids. We've also thrown 22,183 pies. Make that 22,184 pies. I'm Eric reporting from Nickelodeon Studios.
The year started off strong. On January 6, 1995, Nickelodeon Studios filmed the first episode of their new sketch variety show, All That, which would define the direction of Nick's live-action programming for the second half of the 90s. Meanwhile, there's a whole theme park that Nickelodeon Studios was attached to. Universal Studios Orlando was doing okay, with 7.7 million guests attending in 1994, but that was well behind Walt Disney World's 11.2 million and Epcot's 9.7 million. Even Disney MGM Studios, the preemptive knockoff of Universal's idea, was squeezing past Universal with a nice round 8 million. In 1995, Universal Studios Orlando began construction of a $2 billion expansion/second theme park that would become known as Universal's Islands of Adventure, which would quadruple the size of Universal's attractions. Back over at Universal Studios Hollywood, the tram tour was being de-emphasized, and many of Orlando's popular dark rides like E.T. Adventure and Back to the Future the Ride were getting cloned to match the experience with its Florida younger brother. The allure of show business was becoming less and less of a part of Universal Studios' brand, replaced with a heavier emphasis on "we have rides based on movies and TV shows too." The Bates Motel set, which the Orlando site had used for Psycho 4, was demolished, and in its place was the Barney the Dinosaur stage show. The Orlando tram tour, whose starting point was Nickelodeon Studios, was shut down. It's important to point out that Nickelodeon did not have an exclusive contract with Universal.
Dinner!
Don't you sometimes wish the world revolved around you?
Not in the mood for chicken? No problem.
Now there's a whole world that does revolve around you. Nickelodeon Splat City. You can climb, you can slide, or take part in a wacky show. Nickelodeon Splat City, new at Paramount's King's Dominion. Life should always be this good.
Dessert?
Come visit Paramount's King's Dominion. Park open daily.
In 1995, 3 Paramount-owned parks, Great America in Santa Clara, California, Kings Island in Mason, Ohio, and Kings Dominion in Doswell, Virginia, all received versions of the Nickelodeon Splat City, which included several slime-themed attractions and a game show-styled live show called Mega Messamania. These proved fairly popular. Interestingly, despite Universal Studios Hollywood mirroring many of Orlando's attractions in its own park, there was not yet any significant Nickelodeon presence there. The Nickelodeon cable channel was also shifting focus. Nicktoons had been a major critical and financial success since their beginning in 1991, but by 1995, original animation was replacing game shows as the channel's main course. That year, additional reruns of Rugrats were added throughout the week, and suddenly the moderately successful Baby Show became the highest rated program on Nickelodeon. In June of 1995, reruns of Rugrats took 4 spots in Nielsen's ratings top 10 most viewed cable shows. In terms of children's television as a whole, reruns of Rugrats were outperforming Power Rangers and Animaniacs. We've been caught off guard by the success of the show, and we're considering what to do about it. Based on the success we're seeing with Rugrats, it might make sense to revisit our original strategy and make some changes. Nickelodeon and Klasky Csupo had put a pause on Rugrats production in 1993, but the renewed interest gave them the green light for much, much more, turning Rugrats into Nickelodeon's headline product until a certain yellow sponge showed up. Of course, Nickelodeon Studios had nothing to do with animation. Starting with Rocko's Modern Life, Nickelodeon had been producing all of their in-house animation in Studio City, Los Angeles, under the name Games Animation. The production of Nicktoons would basically double going into 1996, with at least one new Nicktoon every year up to 2005, and most years having 2 or even 3 animated shows. Nickelodeon Studios was still important for the channel's live action content, but it was quickly ceasing to be the center of Nickelodeon operations. Nickelodeon Studios was also still an important attraction for Universal Studios Florida, but it was quickly ceasing to fit in with the current goals of the park. But hey, at least Nickelodeon Studios had all that.
Always dreamed of going to Nickelodeon Studios, the first world headquarters for kids, getting covered in slime? Go to your local McDonald's and fill out an entry form at the McWorld display, and this could be you! Brought to you by McDonald's, McWorld, and Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon Studios lost all that. At the end of production of All That's second season, producer Mike Tollin and Brian Robbins requested that production be moved to California, much like the show's predecessor, Roundhouse. Tollin and Robbins were gaining momentum as producers in Hollywood, having received an Oscar nomination for the documentary Hank Aaron, Chasing the Dream, and producing the HBO show Arliss. Tollin Robbins Productions was based in Los Angeles, and flying across the country was exhausting and unnecessary. Season 3 of All That would be filmed in a rented Paramount studio, while the show, and potentially other Nickelodeon projects, looked for another home. While All That moved to California, a sitcom starring All That's 2 breakout stars, Kenan Thompson and Kel Mitchell, went forward at Nickelodeon Studios. This, too, would move to California between its second and third seasons. Nickelodeon was in a significant state of transition at this time. Longtime president Jerry Laybourne stepped down to become president of Disney ABC Cable Networks, with executive vice president Herb Scannell taking her place. The first Nickelodeon-produced movie, Harriet the Spy, hit theaters that year. Hey Arnold and Kablam were kicking off the second wave of Nicktoons, and Blue's Clues premiered, which would be Nick Jr.'s most popular program. Again, none of these productions had anything to do with Nickelodeon Studios. And Nickelodeon Studios didn't have anything new to keep up. Outside of some decor, the studio tour and game lab remained pretty much the same since 1991. 1996 was the first year Nickelodeon wasn't filming any game shows, so the audition element of the attraction was off the table. Gullah Gullah Island was still technically in production, but had gone into a long hiatus after Philip D. Garcia, the puppeteer of the show's iconic yellow pollywog Binya Binya, was involved in a car accident in October that left him in critical condition, and he would sadly die from his injuries on January 3rd, 1997. One new show this year was The Mystery Files of Shelby Woo, which had no studio audience, meaning the only show you could get tickets for was Kenan and Kel. Nickelodeon Studios went from spending $43 million on Nickelodeon Studio Productions in 1995 to $35 million in 1996. Employee numbers were half of what they were in 1992. Nickelodeon Studios' original general manager, Scott Davis, stepped down from the company to become the executive vice president of recreation for MTV Networks, and he was replaced by Tim Quealy, the former vice president of operations, in March of 1996. The studio was showing signs of stagnation, and it was still the biggest television producer in Florida. More than half of the sound stages at Universal Studios and Disney MGM were empty. Florida's dream of being Hollywood East was simply not panning out.
Nick is cool. Nick is slimy. Nick is wow. Nick is Nick is Nick is
The stage facility at 6230 Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood had gone by many names over the years. The Earl Carroll Theater in 1938, the Moulin Rouge in 1953, the Hullabaloo in 1965, the Aquarius Theater in 1968, and the Chevy Chase Theater in 1993. The building had served as a showgirl theater, a nightclub, a rock and roll venue, an off-Broadway musical stage, and finally, a television soundstage. And in 1997, it would become Nickelodeon on Sunset, the new home of Nickelodeon's live-action productions. All That and Kenan and Kel moved to the new California location, and shows that you would assume would be Nickelodeon studio joints, like The Amanda Show or The Nick Cannon Show, were filmed exclusively there as well. Meanwhile, production on The Mystery Files of Shelby Woo had proved very difficult. The weather stinks. Every single day I am dealing with thunderstorms. It's an inhospitable place to shoot film and TV shows, and there's not a tremendous talent pool to work with there. During filming, production switched from shooting on videotape to shooting on far more expensive film, but in doing so, the production allegedly could no longer pay the agreed welfare and pension for the local chapter of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Florida was a free-to-work state, but that didn't mean the state was devoid of unions. 60 crew members on Shelby Woo walked, shutting down filming during the show's third season, and now show creator Alan Goodman was facing pressure to provide. Instead, he took his ball and ran off. The rest of the Mystery Files of Shelby Woo would be filmed in Montreal. They were good crews, but if you can't take advantage of some savings to work there, why bother? I can't speak for anyone else, but if I were a producer thinking of bringing my show down there and shooting non-union, I would have to think twice. We definitely won't be back in Orlando. Nickelodeon returned to game shows this year with Figure It Out, a wacky panel show with popular Nickelodeon personalities attempting to guess these strange habits or accomplishments of kids. There was no in-park contestant audition for this show, as these kids were selected by mail-in auditions, but at least Nickelodeon Studios had a show you could sit in the audience for again. A version of the Game Lab was turned into a road show that traveled across the country, and Nickelodeon Studios went through its first round of layoffs, dropping 9 of its employees, which, when you only have about 100, is still quite a percentage of your workforce. Tim Queeley's tenure as general manager of Nickelodeon Studios was very short-lived, and Guts creator Scott Fishman stepped into the role this year, and would hold on to the role until the studio's closure. After 7 years, Universal Studios Hollywood finally got a Nickelodeon-themed attraction to reflect its Florida sibling. Totally Nickelodeon was a theater game show that saw 2 groups of guests competing against each other in 3 games based on Nickelodeon IPs like Double Dare, Rugrats, and Good Burger. A video of Stick Stickly gave out safety instructions, it had some elaborate props and some great production values. If I'm being honest, it kinda put the old Game Lab to shame. Nickelodeon Studios just wasn't updating itself as an attraction, and other Nickelodeon experiences were starting to outclass it.
And now, direct from Nickelodeon Studios, some vital information.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Bain from the Kenan and Kel Show, and we're here at Nickelodeon Studios, Florida, where we count every possible thing. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Like today, we're about to reach an untied mile marker. Steve here from the Mystery Files of Shelby Woo is our official counter. Isn't that right, Steve?
Don't bother me.
Well, how's it going?
Well, actually, look, we've got a winner. You, young man, are the 1,158th kid with untied shoelaces to visit Nickelodeon Studios, Florida.
All right, and as a 1,158th kid with untied laces, we'd like to give you these. A pair of Velcro sneakers. Just what I needed. That's great. This has been another historic moment from Nickelodeon Studios, your headquarters.
In 1998, Nickelodeon Studios was filming a whopping 2 shows, Figure It Out and the short-lived game show You're On. With all the sitcoms and sketch shows now being filmed at Nickelodeon on Sunset, and games animation being renamed Nickelodeon Animation Studio, Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando was now third fiddle for channel operation, which made it very hard to keep up with the original contracted deal of using Nickelodeon Studios every day of the year. There's less original live-action shows by the network overall, so Orlando, obviously, has felt that to some degree. The challenge is to find other creative ways to be a contributor to our network. And believe it or not, Nickelodeon Studios was still the largest television producer in Florida. So to keep the lights on and to reduce profit loss, Nickelodeon Studios started renting out the space and equipment to other parties.
I met with my counterpart at the time, who was the head of the Universal production group, because they owned all of the other sound stages, and they technically owned the building structure that we were in. We owned all the equipment inside. We had all the TV stuff that we put in. Universal owned the physical structure, the 4 walls. As part of our deal, we could not go out and sell the use of our soundstage to third-party productions. Universal, at the time, really didn't have any soundstages that had video equipment in it. They were basically 4 walls that were used for film. So I went to my counterpart at Universal, sat down, and I said, look, let's do this. I have video equipment. You have stages, but you have no video equipment. Why don't you sell our sound stages to third-party companies, and we'll split the revenue? So we did. So between 1998-99, when our studio stuff started to go way, way down, and 2005, which was sort of like the finish line that we needed to get to, we basically housed third-party productions. We did stuff for Animal Planet. We had some Golf Channel stuff in there. We did a lot of stuff for a lot of people, and basically I would split the revenue with Universal, so we were running Nickelodeon Studios at a net loss.
Oh, and they put up a collection of chewed gum by celebrities somewhere in the studio. I'm not sure exactly where, because that's what kids want to see, right? Tim Allen's used gum?
Can you bite a piece of cheese into the shape of your favorite state? How about stick your ears to the sides of your head? Maybe you have a collection of chewed bubble gum that's 2 stories tall? Whatever you can do, Nick wants to hear about it, because we want more contestants for the game show Figure It Out. So if you have a talent, a collection, or an original invention that's weird, unique, or totally amazing, show us on videotape or take a picture and send it to Nickelodeon's Figure It Out Contestant Search, 1515 Broadway, 38th floor, New York, New York, 10036. Be sure to include your name, age, address, and phone number. Remember, we can't return anything you send in. Sorry. But if you're chosen as a Figure It Out contestant, you'll get a free trip to Nick Studios in Orlando, Florida, where Nick shows are made. So figure out if you've got what it takes to be a contestant on Figure It Out, and you could wind up right here on the only network for you, Nickelodeon.
Hitting cable subscriptions on March 1st, 1999, we had the Nick spin-off channel Nickelodeon Game and Sports for Kids, or Nick Gas as it was commonly called. It was primarily a rerun house for all of Nickelodeon's game shows and whatever sports programming they had at hand, but all original content, mostly interstitials, were handled at Nickelodeon Studios. The studio had so few things going on, just the final season of Figure It Out, that they could devote an entire one of their sound stages to interviews with Ken Griffey Jr. and Penny Hardaway, taking advantage of whatever local sports stars were at hand. If you look at the state of Florida, there's a ton of athletes that live here. You can watch them on Sunday Conversation on ESPN, but that's not what you'll see when they talk to us from a kid's point of view. The Universal Islands of Adventure Park opened on May 28th of that year, and it didn't really bring a rise of attendance, at least not initially. Poor marketing and confusion on if Islands of Adventure was a separate park or was part of Universal Studios meant below average numbers. If Nickelodeon Studios didn't have a long-standing contract with MCA, I do believe they would have pulled the plug on the project by now. The studio attraction was stagnating, and fewer shows were being filmed there. There was nothing to do at this point but limp to the end and close up shop. Or maybe, just maybe, they could find the resolve to take one more earnest shot at the Nickelodeon Studios project.
1 part you, 1 part Nickelodeon. Mix them up in your hometown, and what do you get? Game Lab! Direct from Nickelodeon Studios, it's your chance to experiment with all new Nick games live! Expect strange chemistry, weird physics, and explosive reactions, because Game Lab's got excitement down to a science. Get ready, because Nickelodeon, the network that's always there for you, is coming here for you with Game Lab.
See Game Lab August 22nd at noon and 2:30, brought to you by Time Warner Cable.
On January 25th, 2000, production began on an updated version of Double Dare, aptly titled Double Dare 2000. While Mark Summers only returned as a creative consultant, it was a nice throwback to what kicked the channel into success in the first place. On January 24th, Nickelodeon Studios began a live weekday interstitial show called Slime Time Live, which led in and out of shows and commercial breaks. Hosted outside of the studio, weather permitting, kids would gather up, play games, meet celebrity guests, and get slime or pied. That summer, production began on 2 new sitcoms, Taina and No One Knows Best. They shot a few pilots of other game shows with names like Slime Survivor and Roller Jam, and a few Snick concerts with A-Teens and Baha Men. Like an adrenaline shot to the heart, Nickelodeon Studios was back in full swing. Slime Time Live in particular breathed a lot of life into the park attraction, its exterior sets offering some new exciting visuals for guests. It felt like the first true upgrade to the studio since Game Lab in 1991. There was even a phone-in element, so even if you weren't at Universal Studios, you could still interact with the show. You could still interact with the studio. Slime Time Live fit Nickelodeon's For Kids by Kids mantra more than any other program shot there. Nickelodeon Studios had made it to 10 years, and maybe if they could maintain this momentum, they could really make it last.
What's up, little man?
Double Dare 2000 was cancelled after 1 season. Taina moved to Nickelodeon Sunset for its 2nd season, and No One Knows Best became one of the biggest bombs in Nickelodeon history. Just as quickly as Nickelodeon Studios had found this new momentum, it was gone, leaving just Slime Time Live as the only regular production for the next couple of years. 30 more employees were laid off, and work structure was rearranged. We will be operating on a show-to-show production model, as opposed to having an ongoing production infrastructure. Meaning that Nickelodeon Studios was going to rely more on temporary contract workers and have far fewer full-time employees. On the 29th of May 2001, Nickelodeon Studios auctioned off 2,000 items, including props, set dressing, and production equipment. Effectively a yard sale. Over 500 people showed up, many of them looking to flip whatever they got their hands on. "We're going to resell it on eBay as stuff from Nick shows," said Tiffany Smith, 14, of Fern Park, who was pushing a shopping cart with boxes of china from Gullah Gullah Island and 2 brown fur coats. Honestly, there were more exciting things going on for Nickelodeon at Universal Studios Hollywood. The previous year, Totally Nickelodeon had been replaced with the Rugrats Magic Adventure live show, and a new children's play area called Nickelodeon Blast Zone had been added.
But don't dry off yet. It's time for fun in the brand new Nickelodeon Blast Zone. At Nickelodeon Splash, everyone has buckets of fun. 2 500-gallon water buckets, that is. Hope you didn't get too wet. You can't miss the towering Nickelodeon rockets, blasting out 12,000 gallons of water an hour. While in Wild Thornberry's Adventure Temple, you'll have a ball. Over 10,000 of them.
Sure, it's just a ball pit with the wild thornberries on the wall, but at least it was new. And it's weird that for all of the attractions Hollywood cloned from Orlando, Orlando never cloned any of the Hollywood Nickelodeon attractions. Yes, these year segments are getting shorter and shorter, but Nickelodeon had been slowly wasting away over the past 10 years. And this was the point that the studio died. Slime Time Live was still going on, but the tour was showing inactive sound stages cluttered with old sets, with only the game lab as a guaranteed entertainment, still putting children in a kiddie pool and dumping a bucket of slime over them. Nickelodeon Studios was done. What was once a way to save money on production was now a money sink, and all they were waiting for was to finish out their contract with MCA.
At Universal Studios Florida, kids rule. They'll find all kinds of cool things to do at Nickelodeon Studios. Or they can live the movies at E.T. Adventure. Join in the fun at Woody Woodpecker's Kid Zone. And create chaos at Curious George Goes to Town, where they can clobber Dad in the ball factory and drench the crowd with a humongous bucket of water. Whatever they choose to do, kids are the boss. Only at Universal Studios Florida.
They just kept filming Slime Time Live. Look, I've been trying to find interesting stories for each year of Nickelodeon Studios when it was opened, but it was driving on fumes by this point. No new shows meant no press releases, no game shows meant no advertising for young contestants. All the shows on Nickelodeon people cared about were being made in California. Business articles on Florida's film and television prospects dried up around this time. I can't imagine what it must have been like working at Nickelodeon Studios around 2002. Researching it years later, after the fact, it's just kind of a big bummer. Finally, something new and Nickelodeon related opened at the Orlando park. The previous year had seen the closure of Nickelodeon Studios' next door neighbor, The Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera, and on April 11, 2003, Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast was opened in its place. A simulator ride where you got on an experimental rocket built by boy genius Jimmy Neutron and found yourself flying through different Nicktoon worlds, including Rugrats, The Fairly OddParents, and SpongeBob SquarePants. After the ride, you get photo opportunities with your favorite characters. Finally, some significant Nicktoons representation in the park. Also, Nickelodeon Studios worked on a new game show, Game Farm, which was a video game show for Nick Gas, which many of you are just learning about now.
Ready, set, go! Come on, go, go, go! Go, Plumbers! Come on, Mario! Keep it going! Come on, Mario! Stand up, Mario! Come on, Luigi, I got you can do it! There you go!
But besides that, it was just more Slime Time Live. Nickelodeon's original contract only had a few more months on it, so let's wrap this up. Slime Time Live filmed and aired its last episode on July 2nd, 2004. Another live interstitial show, Nickelodeon Splat, ran from March 7th to August 17th, and became the last thing Nickelodeon Studios would film. And with that, most everyone packed up and went elsewhere, leaving just a skeleton crew of 10 people to run the tour, the gift shop, and the game lab. Nickelodeon renewing their contract with Universal was technically on the table, but at no point was it ever seriously considered.
What is your name? Nicole. Where are you from, Nicole? New York. From New York. Awesome. You're now the team captain for the play. Let's go ahead and meet our band. What is your name? Anne. Madison. Hey, Madison. What's your name? Mason. Mason. Madison and Mason. You guys are going to help each other out for the red team. Over here.
Nickelodeon Studios closed its doors for good on April 30th, 2005. By 2007, the studio was painted over, the slime geyser was removed, and the Nickelodeon time capsule was moved to the Nickelodeon Suites Resort. When the hotel shut down in 2016, the time capsule was then moved to Nickelodeon Animation Studio in Burbank, California. On June 1st, 2007, a Blue Man Group show opened on Stage 18, where it would run until 2012. Nickelodeon production would return to Universal Studios in 2008 for My Family's Got Guts, albeit in a different set of sound stages. It would be the last time Nickelodeon filmed a show at the theme park. Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast closed its doors on August 19, 2011, to be replaced with the Despicable Me Minion Mayhem. Over in Hollywood, the Rugrats Magic Adventure was replaced by Shrek 4D in 2003, and the Nickelodeon Blast Zone was gone by 2008, replaced with the Adventures of Curious George. All of the Nickelodeon Splat City attractions were gone by 2002. Nickelodeon hasn't had any significant theme park presence for the last 12 years. Occasionally, someone will get into the back rooms of Studio 18 and 19 and film the old decorations and murals that are still back there. Fewer and fewer of these remnants survive with every passing year. And that's the story of Nickelodeon Studios. So, what went wrong? Nickelodeon Studios was conceived in the late 1980s, a time when Nickelodeon's bread and butter were their game shows. Double Dare had pulled the channel up from a minor television curiosity to the most watched cable channel of its time. When Nickelodeon made its agreement with Universal and MCA, it was with the intent to produce game shows and talk shows and similar, easy, single-stage productions. Nickelodeon Studios opened in 1990, and by 1991, everything about the channel had changed. They started emphasizing sitcoms and sketch comedy shows, which needed writers and producers and actors. However, there was simply no infrastructure in Florida for Nickelodeon Studios to utilize. Throughout the majority of its run, Nickelodeon Studios was the #1 producer of television in the state. Not because they were producing a lot of shows, but because nobody else was. Universal Studios made some early efforts with Superboy and films like Psycho 4, but production quickly dropped off, and nobody else really committed. Not Disney, not any other studio. Everyone said, hey, come down to Florida, we're going to be Hollywood East, and then Nickelodeon showed up, and nobody else did.
You know, you're not going to get Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola and, Martin Scorsese to say, well, yeah, I'm just going to pick up for the next 6 months and I'm going to move to Orlando and shoot this film, when all the talent and casting is out in California, and the studios they know are in California, and the crews that they know are in California, and that they can live at home. I think Florida would have been better off with the sound stages it built if it would have started smaller by trying to attract some other TV properties. Go get a soap opera, get a sitcom, get a game show. There was never the understanding or the desire that maybe if we walk before we run, maybe if we build the talent base both in front of and behind the camera with smaller projects, let's go get a brand new soap opera that's looking to start up and give them the economic benefit that they want to get, that maybe they will work here and shoot here 8 or 9 or 10 months out of the year, okay? And then we can start to build the base. So when a Martin Scorsese is going to look around ultimately and say, where am I going to do my next film? Well, wow, boy, Florida is less expensive, but look at all the stuff that those crews have done. Maybe they've actually got some talented people there. Maybe I should check out that state. They never did that. They went right to the finish line and said, hey, we're going to start making movies. but they never did anything to attract or build the talent base here, so it just stayed in California.
Many of these people were coming in from New York and especially California, states with strong unions, states where you could get better deals. The second Nickelodeon allowed Roundhouse to move to California, it was over for them. Once they gave an inch, everyone knew they could work towards a better deal. And that's good. It was morally right for Nickelodeon to allow these shows to move out of Florida. But it made Nickelodeon Studios into a leaky bucket, some of their best shows escaping through the cracks. And if none of the fun shows are shooting at Nickelodeon Studios, then it becomes way less satisfying as a theme park attraction. Florida being a right-to-work state was frankly a scummy reason for Nickelodeon to set up shop there. Wanting to avoid unions just isn't a good look, and the few times Nickelodeon Studios ran up against a union, they didn't know what to do with themselves, opting instead to throw a fit and take the show elsewhere. With live-action productions moving to Hollywood and the increased emphasis on animation, Nickelodeon Studios had less and less oversight as the years progressed. It became a vestigial organ, Nickelodeon's appendix. That's harsh, and I mean every word of it. But Nickelodeon Studios was not without its value. Nickelodeon Studios was one of the few means a child could be physically present among the television they watched. Being able to crawl around the innards of a working Nickelodeon soundstage, you could see, touch, hear, and even smell your favorite shows in production. Nickelodeon wasn't pretending that these shows were being made by magic. They knew that the behind-the-scenes stuff was as interesting as the shows themselves, and they were entrusting you with that information. Disneyland, Walt Disney World, they wanted to create a fantasy of being in Cinderella's castle, or flying through a scene in Star Wars, or visiting a haunted mansion. They were entertaining you with a fiction, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Nickelodeon is for kids by kids. It wasn't going to talk down to you, ever. It was entertaining you with the truth. And in some minor ways, you could affect how the shows were made, and that was exciting. In some ways, Nickelodeon Studios was the closest modern example of what Carl Laemmle set out to create over 100 years ago with Universal City, a fun, inviting place where the average person could get up close and personal with how their entertainment is made. Universal Studios Orlando was simply a collection of IP-driven rides to compete with Disney, getting rid of most of the behind-the-scene attractions very early on. Universal Studios Hollywood still has the tram tour that started it all, but since Jaws, it's become a Universal Greatest Hits tour. Outside of its own name brand, Nickelodeon Studios wasn't that IP-driven. Whatever show they happened to be making was the one you saw. You didn't have to walk through a dedicated All That room, followed by a dedicated Gullah Gullah Island room. You just saw what you could see. It would have been so easy to call Game Lab Double Dare and try to pass it off as the TV show to the kiddies. For all of its faults, Nickelodeon Studios never talked down to its young guests. Today, Nickelodeon Studios is the crown jewel of Nickelodeon nostalgia. Several people have devoted projects about the place online, attempts at documentaries, dozens of amateur interviews. It clearly had a strong cultural impact for Nickelodeon watching millennials. This, on the other hand, has been a much more warts and all look at the studio. Many nostalgic fans want to see Nickelodeon Studios come back. That is both very unlikely and also a terrible idea. If Nickelodeon Studios came back, it wouldn't be in the form you're familiar with. If they ever did a big studio tour again, it would be in Los Angeles, where the shows are made. It probably wouldn't have any attached activities like Game Lab because Nickelodeon doesn't lean into the messy game show aesthetic as much as they used to. It would just be a tour. If they ever made something called Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando again, it wouldn't be an active studio because nothing has improved in terms of film and television production. You shouldn't want it to be a working television studio. If anything, work conditions in Florida are getting way worse with the pro-censorship goblins running state office right now. A new Florida Nickelodeon studio would just be an attraction cashing in on the name. Maybe a dark ride, maybe a museum, but not an active soundstage. Nickelodeon Studios will never come back. Not in the way you want it to. And even if it could come back, it probably shouldn't. And that's okay. Nothing lasts. Not all ideas pan out. Instead, we should learn from the past, and we should take the feelings that Nickelodeon Studios gave us, that mix of joy and playfulness and honesty, and try to put it back into the world in our own ways. Even if it's just showing a younger generation something really cool.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I can't believe she actually did it. You stopped it with slime. Hey, you know what? We're back live. We've made it, and I've just got one word. That Wendy and Will are okay, except that Wendy's chasing Will with a large rubber mallet. So we are here, and thanks to Alberta Griffin, Nick Studios is officially open, and that means the First Kids headquarters is here and ready for your inspection. And if you come visit soon, you can watch either Family Double Dare or Make the Grade or Eureka's Castle, and you can watch it being made, participate, and I'd like to thank the Don't Just Sit There guys for showing us all around Universal. You guys did a great job, and many thanks to all the folks at Universal Studios Florida for having us with them in their amazing new parks. Thanks to Kid and Play, the Cover Girls, Perfect Gentleman, Bill Cosby, Steven Spielberg, Superboy, and a special thanks to Roseanne Lapopolo. Roseanne, we could have never done this show without you. Round of applause for our producer and all the folks who worked on this show, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mark Summers, talking to you live from your spanking new headquarters, saying so long. We're going to see you here at Nickelodeon. Thanks a lot, folks. Good night. Have a nice evening.
All right, y'all.
Great job. You were terrific.
Minute, all right?
Oh, boy.
Wiz, turn it down, dude. Hey, could y'all please shut up? Wiz, chill. Yo, Play got something to say.